Concerns about Israel's war in Gaza spreading to other countries in the region are now being expressed by Biden administration officials, if you could believe it. Now, in a call with his Israeli counterpart, Yoav Gallant, Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin raised alarm over Israel escalating tensions with Lebanon. Axios broke this story, reporting that Austin's message to Gallant reflected growing anxiety in the White House that Israeli military action in Lebanon is exacerbating tensions along the border, which could lead to a regional war. Wow, it's amazing. It seems like even in the Biden administration, there are some people, including someone like Lloyd Austin, convinced that Israel is acting in a belligerent manner and is gonna drag not just Israel, but the United States into a regional war, okay? Men and women in our armed forces are currently being attacked by rocket fire as a result of this. But let me give you more details. One US official said that the White House asked Austin to express concern to Gallant about the escalating Israeli military action in Lebanon. Let me give you a few examples. Some in the Biden administration are concerned Israel is trying to provoke Hezbollah and create a pretext for a wider war in Lebanon that could draw the United States and other countries further into the conflict, according to sources briefed on the issue. Israeli officials flatly deny it. They can deny it. They deny a lot of things, but their actions speak for themselves. The Israeli press reported that several days after the war broke out, Gallant and several senior IDF commanders wanted to conduct a wide preemptive strike against Hezbollah. Preemptive strike against Hezbollah in Lebanon. According to the reports, Prime Minister Netanyahu luckily overruled Gallant. Now, there's been skirmishes in the border area. Last week, we shared some details about what happened to a Lebanese grandmother and her 3 grandchildren as she was like near the Lebanese-Israeli border. Israel did an airstrike, wiped her out. She died along with her 3 grandchildren. An Israeli source said Austin asked Gallant for clarification about Israeli airstrikes in Lebanon and asked that Israel avoid steps that could lead to an all-out war between Israel and Hezbollah. Gallant told Austin Israeli policy is not to open a second front in Lebanon and stressed that he doesn't think such a scenario is going to happen, the Israeli source said. And Gallant also told Austin that Hezbollah is escalating attacks, including a drone attack from Syria on the city of Eilat, 350 miles away. Hezbollah is playing with fire, Gallant told Austin. But their rhetoric on social media is pretty clear. They keep making points about how, Hezbollah comes for us. We're gonna do to the Lebanese citizens, civilians, what we've been doing to Palestinians in Gaza, which is quite an admission for those who continue to provide cover for the brutality that the Israeli government is carrying out against Palestinian civilians in both the Gaza Strip and, let's keep it real, also in the West Bank.
Okay, so we've been criticizing the Biden administration plenty for their actions in this war, seemingly unabated green light to the Israeli government. But here we go. Here's a situation where we finally have a report of not a green light. So credit where credit is due. Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin, thank you for trying to quell the conflict so that it doesn't spread. We appreciate that, and that's part of the Biden administration. So credit to Biden if he's having his defense secretary go out there and make sure that the war does not get broader, okay? So now, historically and in this conflict how much Biden has backed Israel. And so that gives you some insight into how much it's Israel that's trying to start this conflict with Lebanon and Hezbollah as opposed to Hezbollah starting it. Like if you said to me Hezbollah is starting the conflict, I'd believe that in a second. Hezbollah and Hamas have started plenty of conflicts with Israel. But here's the US government saying, no, we think Israel's starting it. That is incredibly telling. The US government never says that, even if it's true. So here they are going, no, don't make the war broader. That's crazy. And by the way, a very rare piece of credit, if this reporting is correct, to Netanyahu, the first one I might have ever given him, if he prevented Gallant from starting a preemptive strike and a preemptive war with Lebanon. You know what another word for preemptive war is? A war of aggression, offensive war, a war you started. And so apparently Yoav Gallant is a lunatic. I mean, the defense secretary for Israel is apparently mentally unbalanced if Netanyahu has to check you because you're trying to start too many wars and kill too many civilians.
I have to give you a few more details because a Biden senior advisor by the name of Amos Hochstein visited Lebanon just last week to deliver a message to not escalate the situation, right? The impression the Biden administration got during and after Hochstein's visit was the Lebanese government and public as well as Hezbollah are not interested in a war with Israel, two sources with knowledge of the situation said. In fact, Biden administration officials are satisfied that Hezbollah's leader, Hassan Nasrallah, made it clear that they are not, it was a speech last week, we covered it briefly, but did not want to escalate toward war with Israel. Hezbollah does not want that, probably because Hezbollah knows that the United States government and its military has the Israeli government's back. And they don't want to get into a broader war. But I mean, how do you sit back and watch the slaughter of Palestinian civilians? How do you sit back and watch, the Israeli government launch their own airstrikes, against, people in Lebanon, like slaughtering a grandmother and her 3 grandchildren? The belligerent behavior of the Israeli government is going to drag us into a massive war. Netanyahu, Cenk, do not give him any credit, none. Netanyahu, since 2015, has been trying to goad the United States into a war with Iran. He wants it, he's thirsty for it, okay? He doesn't care that we would be sacrificing the men and women in our military to fight his war. He doesn't care. And what do we get out of it? More hostility directed toward the United States as we provide cover for the war crimes that the Israeli government is carrying out right now. No, I do not agree with that.
Yeah, so you might be wondering why, as Israel is reeling from the worst attack they've had ever, why would they want a broader war? Well, there is an answer to that, and the reporting bears it out. They want to drag America into the war. And so they think if it's a broader war, America will be forced to join on their side. And that way they could broaden it also to Iran and try to destroy Iran as well. They can't handle Iran on their own, but if they make America fight their war, then they'll be able to what? Why? Why would you even get into a war with Iran? Are you nuts? Are you a lunatic? Iran right now doesn't have nukes, doesn't have anything along those lines. And by the way, they were in a peace deal where we took out all of their uranium. So they couldn't possibly have nukes. But no, Netanyahu said, rip up that deal. So now they couldn't get uranium again, which makes them more dangerous. This is absolute lunacy. And so look, sorry, but the American people didn't sign up for this. 2/3 of Americans right now want a ceasefire, let alone war with Lebanon or Iran. Nobody wants war. The right wing doesn't want war. The left wing doesn't want war. The only people that want war are the people in Washington. Okay, and even at this point, Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin doesn't apparently even want a broader war. But if Israel thinks, hey, not if they get attacked, but if they do a preemptive strike on Lebanon or Iran, there's no way in the world we should join them. You want to start a war and then have American kids die on your behalf and sit back and enjoy this? No way, no way. We should not help them if they start the wars. And by the way, the occupation should end immediately because the occupation drives all of this conflict in the first place, and it is totally unjustifiable. The only excuse for occupation is racism. So period. 56 years is not enough, it's insanity. So a no to all these wars, but again, I'll go back to credit to Austin and Biden for at least trying to make sure that it's contained and does not turn into something that swallows up the entire Middle East and drags America and kills our kids as well in this totally and utterly senseless war.
If you enjoyed this video, that's because of our members. They make us independent, they make us strong, and they make us honest. Become a member today by hitting the join button below.